Celtics Beat is brought to you by Prize Picks and the GameTime app.
What's up, everyone? One last pre-holidays edition of Celtics Beat. I don't know if it'll be our last one of 2024. I guess it probably won't be.
We got one more.
Sit on the 20th. Yeah, so we got one more with this weekly program, but it is the last one before Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever obviously you're celebrating. Hopefully it is a fun, restful, relaxing time filled with lots of Christmas Day basketball, football throughout the week, be it the bowl games and college football playoff, NFL even trying to join the Christmas party, and Netflix. And I mean, look, sports have taken over, but no one knows that quite as well as our guest here on this program. Someone we haven't had on in a while. I'm thrilled to have him back. Matt Moore, of course, from Action Network, and he's part of the Locked On family, which is the only reason that we will let him offer any sort of a preference on Corrales to us. He has a Substack, and he has been writing about the Celtics of late. He's on Twitter at HP Basketball. Matt, welcome back, man. How are you?
Doing well, man. Thanks for having me on again.
Absolutely. So there are a number of reasons that we wanted to have you here and just, get a national perspective on this Celtics team and what it's been doing. We're looking at a top 3 team in the NBA standings wise. There are plenty of people, obviously, that believe the Celtics are the number 1 team in the NBA, certainly the defending champion, and playing at a very similar level, and even in some nights, many nights, an even higher level than what we saw last year. They've dropped 2 out of their last 4, just to remind us that they are human. It's kind of them, I guess, even losing to the Bulls outright as massive favorites. What a way to celebrate your Thursday, folks. But, we got games on the horizon again with Chicago, this home and home, albeit with a little break in between. This one is in Chicago at Orlando, little 2-game trip. And then, of course, the Christmas Day celebration against Philadelphia, which won't probably look quite what people envisioned back in the offseason. But Matt, you've been writing about this team, following this team very closely. I see you tweeting about this team all the time. You go back and forth with Greeny, among others. And, you put something on your Substack the other day. There was just a really interesting read about, the math of the Celtics approach to basketball. Specifically, if people want to search for it, it's called Boston and the Math Apocalypse. And I feel like for a couple of years now, we've been talking about math, and Joe Mazzulla has been talking about math, and Brad Stevens, even when he was coaching, it was, the percentage of taking threes versus taking long jumpers, mid-range jumpers, or even attacking the basket for that matter. But only now is it kind of coming into focus in a way that, you put together very, very well, points per possession and net rating and all of that. But to the point where this is such a larger scale issue, or at least we've made it out to be, where even LeBron is coming out and effectively bitching about the way NBA basketball is being played today. So I'm curious, just to kind of, start the conversation anyway, as to what it is that you have isolated, and a lot of it's in your article. I would encourage people go read it, but to give you a chance to explain it yourself, what it is you've isolated about the way the Celtics play that just takes it to such a different level than what anyone else in the league is doing right now.
I think what's interesting is we're kind of teetering on a scale here. Like there's a teeter totter, and if you go too far, you start to tip over. And I think Boston's on that. And I think the league is on that as well. And what I think the big takeaway I had was this was like the core of it. If your possession versus Boston ends with an uncontested catch and shoot 3, it's a failure regardless of whether they make it or not. The minute that you have left the defender, you have lost that possession. Like if you leave the guy in the corner, if you leave the guy on the wing, if you leave a 3-point shooter to go help, you have lost that possession, because Boston will find him, and they will find him with a good pass, and they will find him with a good pass in the pocket that he can shoot from, even if it's not a perfect pass, even if there's a moderate contest on it. At that point, you have lost the possession because of how Boston is approaching this. And what I also compared it to was a scene from Home Alone where Kevin's on the stairs going, "I'm right here, you morons, come and get me." And that's what Boston does with attacking the rim. Oh no, you better go stop Jason Tatum. Uh-oh, Luke Cornett's loose on the roll. Jaylen Brown's in the dunker spot. And while they're happy to take those shots if you give them to them completely uncontested. That's not what they want. They want you to react so that they can generate those threes. They don't pass up good layups for threes, but I think that they probably think about it from time to time. I think if we went back, there's probably some times when it's like, yeah, he probably could have made that layup, but he kicked it out for three. And even if they miss, that is a loss for the defense. And teams, I think, have to balance it. Now, on the other end, when I watch the Celtics and I look at their overall numbers, I think Boston is teetering a little bit too far. And I've seen teams do this after championship runs where they lean so hard into that identity and they feel so invincible that they feel like nothing could possibly derail them from that. But if you don't play with discipline on both ends of the floor, if you don't have a certain level of balance to how you play, if you're just like, we're just going to beat you with the math because every single possession, we're going to like on average, you're going to score this and we're going to score this even on a moderate night, you run the risk of running into problems in the playoffs where those outcomes don't exist. So I think it's like a fascinating moment in time of I I don't know that teams right now understand how much they have to adapt their specific style if they want to have any hope versus Boston. These losses, Chicago is shot variance. The Cavs loss was shot variance. That's it. Like that's all it is. The Grizzlies loss was a back-to-back and shot variance. It's not about actually having a formula. And Celtics fans very rightly are going to feel like there is no formula. I'm not sure that that's true, but teams have not taken them seriously enough on this paradigm to actually start adapting to give themselves a real chance to win these games.
Yeah, it's a fascinating look, and I really appreciate the deep dive into it because a lot of people have been complaining, opining about the 3-point era and how it's as you said, teetering into the wrong direction. But oftentimes I will say the way Boston generates threes versus other teams is very different. You know, I think you highlighted the ability to hunt, catch, and shoot threes more than others, and that's really the shot they're looking for. And what I really liked in your piece, Matt, was the comment on spacing and how they force you to do certain things with the way that the floor is spaced. And one of the things is I went back and looked at it this morning, in a lot of your clips, if you just take the still shot before you press play, I love to look where Derek White is, because Derek White is often near the ball handler, but far enough behind the 3-point line where he is a catch and shoot three from a really good spot for him specifically, and far enough away to get that shot off before the defense can recover. And that's, to me, again, going back and rereading that this morning, I was like, this is something that I didn't realize first time, but as I read it the second time and I know what to expect, it's like watching a show the second time. You know what to expect, you can find different things. That's, to me, I think the beauty of this offense is as how well it's spaced. And you pair that with the quote from Jaylen Brown earlier in the season about the killer whale offense and how they hunt you. They're putting you in a bind in which they're dictating everything. Mm-hmm. Whatever you do, they've already thought of. And by the way, as you're thinking about how to recover over here, on this side of all this stuff over here, there's Payton Pritchard over there. And guess what? He's had an unbelievable season. So as you explain your content and explain the article and what Boston's doing, how much does the spacing affect Boston's ability to put you in these disadvantageous positions?
If you go through and you just run through hundreds of NBA clips, one of the things that will actually, I think, really blow your mind is how much a footstep matters. There's space on the court, right? We got 90 feet and we've got all this space, and like it shouldn't mean that much. You would be amazed. James Harden won MVP because of his ability to very quietly and almost imperceptibly move to his left while dribbling without you noticing. So you stand still and he has moved just a half step to his left, which means that when he goes left, you are not in position to defend him. With Boston, the first clip that I start out with is a Giannis Antetokounmpo help on Damian Lillard in ISO versus Jason Tatum when Dame does a pretty good job. And what you notice is White's not at the 3-point line and he's not a step over to make the pass easier for Tatum. With where he's at, it is just far away that even Giannis Antetokounmpo, person made out of rowboat oars, is unable to get back and recover. Like human pterodactyl Giannis cannot recover to get out and contest that three adequately. And a lot of these are, and I do think that this matters, an open catch and shoot rhythm 3 is the ideal. But a rhythm catch and shoot 3, even if it's moderately contested, is actually better than an uncontested dribble up out of rhythm 3. Like Boston's entire thing is every single one of their shots, you're never like, oh, that's a bad shot. It might be from Tatum every now and again. That's a criticism of his. But Jason does that to keep the defense honest. And because Tatum has the ability to hit those, and if he works on that enough, he's going to get to a level where he's that kind of scorer. And that's going to shift his game entirely and how teams have to defend him. But what I kind of noticed, you mentioned Peyton Pritchard. Like, if you, it's like, well, yeah, but those are numbers. I'm telling you, that's how they're beating you. This is what's frustrating is when people are like, well, I don't really care about the metrics. You should, because that's how they're murdering you. Because Jason Tatum on a contested 2-pointer with a defender within 2 feet of him, within 2 feet, like 2 feet of him, is still only going to score 0.96 points per possession. That's 96 per 100 possessions. A Peyton Pritchard catch and shoot 3 is a 140 offensive rating. You're never going to keep up with that, ever. And teams' inability to understand that because they look at, and this is a credit to Tatum and Brown and how Missoula has built the offense, they cannot help themselves from, I got to help my teammate. I got to crowd the paint. I got to show him a crowd, because that's what they've been taught their entire lives. And Boston has taken those strategies and made them into mortal weaknesses for the opponent.
Let's take a quick break. Tell you today's show is powered by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. I mean, with over 10 million members, billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to everyone. All you do, you pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Let me say that again. 1,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long, Ev, on Prize Picks.
Yeah, Koff, so many things makes Prize Picks great, but in my opinion, it's all about flex play, okay? And Prize Picks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out even if your lineup isn't perfect, right? Like, it's unheard of in the space. Nobody else is doing that, I promise you. And Week 16 are underway, Kaufman. Look, it's been a tough year for the Pats, all right? We'll just get out of the way, all right? We can all admit that, right? So with that in mind, as we look at the slate for this weekend, I'm playing a lot of things against the Patriots. I'm going Josh Allen over 238.5 yards passing, whether it's snow, sleet, rain, whatever. Josh Allen's a freight train you can't stop, so I'm riding that.
The MVP, man.
He's ridiculous right now. James Cook, I think the reason why the Bills have been so good is because James Cook can actually run the rock this year. Over 65.5 rushing yards. And then, look, Washington, the Commanders, their defense is really bad. I like Devontae Smith over a half a touchdown against Washington. If you go 3 for 3 on that, Kaufman, you 9 times your money. That means you bet $20, you win $180, buddy.
That sounds pretty good. So join now. This holiday season, Prize Picks is giving away 2 free picks in December, giving away $30+ million in rewards during Pixmas. Download the app today. Use code CLNS. Get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, code CLNS, $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. So download the app today. Prize Picks. Run your game. Let's get back to the show. There's one thing I preach on this show from time to time, Matt, is just sort of the reminder of enjoy the journey and the process and where we are. Because even as, bring football into it, and I'll do this periodically and as part of the comparison, as a Patriots fan, like even during 20 years of dominance and annihilation of the league, I feel like I properly enjoyed it. But, now with where they are, obviously as a franchise, you look back and it's like, man, did I enjoy it enough? Like, boy, I should have been in front of my TV every Sunday, every Pats game, as opposed to like that one time they're like, no, we can go apple picking or whatever it is. Like, I don't have to watch. They're going to win. They're a 20-point favorite. They're It's not going to be that kind of thing. Like, it's not even going to be close. I bring that up because every once in a while within this now with the Celtics, I'll sort of go back through the brain a little bit, remind myself that a decade or so ago, like the best 3-point shooter on this team was like Avery Bradley. They were not a good 3-point shooting team. They were not a good shooting team. Not to, have Avery Bradley catching strays here on just before Christmas on this podcast. But one of the things that you highlighted in your article was that, there's this sort of delusion, my word, not yours, that the Celtics are an elite 3-point shooting team. When in reality, when you dig into the numbers, they're obviously very good, well above average, but they're not elite, not even top 10 necessarily, depending on the metrics you're looking at. It's more shot selection and volume, obviously. And I'm guilty of this. Like, I look at the Celtics, I'm watching the Celtics. I feel like they are an elite 3-point shooting team because they just have so many options, many of the guys that you guys have already talked about. So what is it about this team that, I guess can rise above in that way that we're talking about that other teams theoretically could model? Or is it unrealistic just based on roster construction here versus elsewhere?
So I think that's a great question. A lot of it is you do have to factor in that volume is always going to create a cost on efficiency, unless you're Peyton Pritchard, apparently. Like everybody else, it's like if you take enough threes, yeah, you're going to miss more, but your effective field goal percentage is still going to go up because you're taking those shots instead of 2-pointers. And if you're hitting more threes, if you're hitting the same amount of threes as twos, you're just going to wind up better over the long run. And so even if you're a 35% 3-point shooter, there's still like that benefit there. Harden's like the king of this, and not to bring him back up again, but this really was like a big part of it. Was you would look at his scoring in Houston and be like, he's not a great shooter. He's not Steph Curry. He's not shooting 42% from 3, but he shot so many that over the course of the game, you would wind up losing those possessions. Like you come down, you get a dunk, that's great. James Harden came down and hit a step back 3, or the Celtics got a catch and shoot Derek White 3. They win that possession, and over the course of those 2 possessions, they've won those 2 possessions. Like that set of possessions, they've won, and so they wind up kind of getting there. I think the other thing is we kind of mentioned with LeBron's comments about this. A lot of it is teams that take a lot of threes that cannot make them. Like that's not. We think of that as bad. Like we got all these teams taking threes and they can't hit a lick. Okay. But we used to have a lot of teams taking mid-range 2s that couldn't hit a lick. Like, that's just teams taking the shots that they shouldn't. Getting your team to take the right shots is such a big part of coaching. JB Bickerstaff is really good at this, where if you look at his resume, his teams consistently take the best shots. But guess what? Like, his teams are still always pretty terrible offensively because he doesn't have the personnel to take those shots. Would they be better if maybe they took some different ones? Yeah, but the problem is, if they take the shots that they're better at, they lose to teams like Boston or even the Bulls because they can't keep up. That's where the current NBA is you have to be able to build a model of we can sustainably keep up with elite offenses while playing to our strengths. That's the challenge. You can't just play to your strengths and you can't just take threes. You have to be able to play to your strength, which incorporates 3-pointers. Denver has one of the most efficient offenses in the league, but they don't take enough threes for them to compete a lot of nights. They're up against it. They're starting at a disadvantage every single game. Like I said this in the article as well, that with Boston, you are starting off behind. Like that's it. Unless you come into the game with, we're going to do everything we can to limit their threes and we'll give up the rim and we're going to take threes no matter what. Unless you take that approach, you have already lost. You are already behind at least, and you're relying on shot variance, which will get you some wins, but probably not enough for it to work out.
Yeah, you look at that Chicago game Thursday night, Chicago beats Boston, and you can label that to a little bit of shot variance. But one of the things that you look at in that game that I thought was interesting was how quickly the Bulls get into their sets so that they can catch Boston in, trying to cross match, trying to figure things out. All of a sudden, you give up an open shot. Now, part of this, Zach LaVine was out of his mind Thursday night, and sometimes that's it. Just nothing you can do about that. The game previously, it was Nikola Vucevic who almost took Boston out. He was just on fire, and sometimes you just got to tip your cap, but there are certain things that I think that Chicago has done to give other teams an idea of what it would take not to beat Boston in a game, because essentially at the end of the day, that's not what anybody's trying to do. You got to beat this team 4 times in 7 games. So you're talking about models and trying to build the correct model
Right.
to beat Boston 4 times. And this is one of the things when, this is not as much this year. It was more last year when every single loss, and again, you deal with idiots in your mentions all the time more than any of us do. So, but my point was last year, whenever anybody, they would lose a game, everyone would lose their mind. It was like, oh, this guy's falling. Blah, blah, blah. Winning a championship gives you whatever. In terms of models, is there a model out there that a team does consistently that you say, yeah, that might be the way that a team could beat Boston 4 times in 7 games? Because so far, the only team, in my opinion, and it's funny just because they're now in the middle of trying to sell guys off, Chicago's the only team really that has given Boston trouble in 2 games. One they won and one Boston won. So is there any other team out there that jumps out to you that could give Boston a tough time?
All right, so the models to kind of beat Boston are, one, a pure shot variant series. Boston can't hit water if they fall out of a boat. The other team shoots lights out in 3 games. It comes down to a game 7, and then anything can happen. Like, that's a shot variance game as well. Like, that's not sustainable. The second is, if you're able to invert this math defensively, and you're able, like, look at what Chicago did last night, right? Don't look at defensively, but my point here is Boston took 56 threes. God, 56 threes. But Chicago took 52. So they only lost that 3-point battle by 4. Now you're in a range where you're not in such a hole that maybe you can get the outcomes that you need if you have consistent scoring options, like a Zach LaVine going off. The teams I look at are on the defensive side. And the question is going to be, can they generate enough offense to get over the minimum hump of what Boston's going to bring to the table? Because that's the thing. You can play an absolutely incredible game versus Boston, and it's like, yeah, you held them to a 112 offensive rating. That's still higher than a lot of teams are going to be in the playoffs. OKC is a really interesting one. We saw what happened in the Cup when their shots don't fall. So they had a miserable shooting night. Shea gets bottled up by isolation defense, and that was really difficult. But if we look defensively, OKC has the propensity to do this. They can switch everything. Their rotations are perfect. Their closeouts are elite. They have the right timing to where they can at least show a little bit, and they can actually adapt a game plan to keep them within range. They're going to take enough threes to be in that contest. So if they have a series where Isaiah Joe is red hot, Aaron Wiggins is red hot, Alex Caruso hits a few, Jalen Williams has a great series, and Shea is the guy, that's enough to get you 3 wins, and then that gets you to a game 7. That's the finals. The other team I look at really quite honestly is the Orlando Magic, which has actually given Boston some trouble through the years. Like, that's not a great matchup for them because they have those perimeter defenders. The easy response is just like, is Orlando really going to score enough? And the answer, to be perfectly honest, is we don't know. Because that first 5 games when Orlando shot out of the gate, when Paolo and Franz were there with the rest of that team, their offense looked fundamentally different and better. And since then, they've ground back into the absolute, like, rock throwing trebuchet that they were last year, and they're not good enough offensively to be able to keep up. Like, that team's never going to beat Boston. But if Paolo and Franz get back, and especially if at the deadline they add one more shooter, and they get KCP past the early season shooting struggles he has, which he looks like he's turned that corner, that becomes very interesting. But this was a big takeaway from the last time the Cavs met the Celtics. The Cavs won that game, but I looked at the number of 3-point attempts that the Cavs gave up in that game, and I was like, you're not going to win the series. Unless you can show me fundamentally that you can adapt to what Boston does, you're never going to beat a team. You're never going to beat Boston being like, we're going to do what we do, and we're going to make them adapt to us. Give that up now. They are too good at what they do. You have to admit they are superior and game plan against that. That's the only real model that you can really build.
When Max was on with us, Cedric Maxwell, what, a month ago, something like that?
Yeah.
That was the team, right? That he shouted out, Orlando.
Yeah, he's been talking about it for a while.
Yeah, the one that he felt could give Boston trouble in the Eastern Conference at least. I'm wondering, and I was talking to F about this before the show, Matt, and I just, national perspective, I'm wondering what you think. the LeBron comments again about we need to look at the league and the way this game is played. And it feels like we have our text thread, our show text thread, and we were getting into this a little bit about how the league every X number of years kind of goes through this introspective, how are we playing and how where's it going to go? How's it going to, all that stuff. I can't help but wonder, maybe just because this is a Celtics podcast, are we having this same conversation if everything is happening in the league the way it is right now, except it's not Boston, it's Oklahoma City, or name your team? Is this a Boston problem that has every, a marquee franchise, most banners in the league and all of that? Is this a Celtics issue or a Celtics based issue that is such a national conversation to where, former players, Barkley, Shaq, all these guys, or obviously current all-timers like a LeBron are weighing in on almost a daily basis? Or is it a conversation we'd be having regardless, just because of where things have shifted, not just obviously in the last couple of years with Boston, but really going back to, Splash Brothers and the beginning of that run for Curry, Clay, eventually Durant and that whole crew with the Warriors?
I will both reject the premise and pander to Celtics fans. And I'll say this. It's not a Boston problem. As much as Boston feels
Targeted,
hunted, unfairly criticized, you are the second most iconic franchise in the league. And the only reason that you're not number one is because the other one is in LA. Like, that's it. Like, that's the only reason. Like, if we're talking about the most, like, if you think about what is the team of the NBA, it's the Boston Celtics, no question. Like, that's the NBA team, is the Boston Celtics. And I always get confused about the media criticism, because I'm like, guys, you have one of the largest chunks of I would call them sympathizers in national media. There's so many guys with Boston connections that roll around and defend, I think, the Celtics. I don't think it's about Boston, because we had this conversation before. This has been burbling. It happened with Houston with the Daryl Morey stuff. Like, it happened there. It has happened consistently with all of these teams that have done it. Like, we first started noticing this with the Rockets when they missed 28 threes versus the Warriors, is when people were like, really? Like, why don't you go inside and blah, blah, blah. It's like, they're open. I think the jump shots off the dribble is fundamentally different. When you're watching teams that can't shoot do this consistently, that to me is like the problem that you run into, because like the Clippers are fourth most in jumpers and 3-point jumpers off the dribble, and yet they're at 34% on those shots. Like, they don't shoot well on those shots. The Celtics are number one in that category, and you're at 32%. Like, you don't shoot well off of the dribble, but you take a ton of them, and those are the shots that annoy them. If this was OKC, I think you would still have a lot of aversion. I actually think there would probably be more, because the league tends to not like it when small market teams are visible. They don't want them to be. Like, most of the media is like, can you just go away and give us Lakers Celtics every year? Because that's all we really want, is Lakers Celtics and Lakers Knicks. But what I will tell you is, if the Los Angeles Lakers led the league in 3-point attempts, we wouldn't hear a thing. We wouldn't hear anything. Not from LeBron, not from the media. It would be like, look at this era the Lakers have ushered in. Aren't we lucky to live in a time when the Lakers have embraced math? I've always said education is important. That's what we would hear from people if it was the Lakers. It's not a Celtics thing. It's that the only team that wouldn't catch grief over this is the Lakers.
Yeah, and it's funny to have JJ come out the past couple of days and say what he said about the way the league is covered, the reliance on 3-pointers, but more about how the discussion is sort of catered, whether it's online or on television or in podcasts or whatever. And one of the things that I really liked about it is, like, we do a lot to denigrate, and to speak poorly about what is happening instead of trying to uplift people. Like, again, I tried to do this last year in real time. Like, what we saw last year with Boston was historically unbelievable. And I tried to, every chance I get, speak on it. And some people, like Sean Grandy, would be on the show, and Sean always has the stats at 3 a.m. that, are unbelievable. And, he told us back in February, Coffin, I think it was February, January, somewhere there. He goes, look, if you look at the numbers and look at what Boston's doing, they're gonna win the title. Like every team that's done this and where they're at, they've won the title. And so I one of the things I don't like is like just because it's different and isn't the same NBA that we all romanticize and fantasize about doesn't mean it's not good. Doesn't mean the product isn't good. It's just different. And we've done a poor job, I think, highlighting some of the better things that have come out of this. Like, and I was listening to Cam Johnson talk about this with Sue Bird on Young Man of the Three about how like the spacing of the 3-point era has allowed for more dunks in the league because the paint's never been more wide open ever in the history of the NBA. And we don't focus on that part. We focus on the jump shooting part. And so my question, I guess, revolves more around like, how do we change this narrative? Like, because again, I thought your piece was very enlightening. It was in a lot of detail on why it's great and why it's different and why Boston is doing something that should be celebrated. And yet we don't have the same mindset with everybody. Everybody's, and again, you have, Charles Barkley talks about how much the league sucks every week. It's like, and he can't name like half the guys on rosters. Him and Shaq don't know who plays for what teams. So how do we change this narrative to accept that this brand of basketball is here to stay, and that it's actually not bad. It's actually pretty fun to watch.
That's a great question. I think there's a couple of things. On the media side, I think that the new media deal is going to offer up some opportunities. We'll see who's in charge and what decisions they make. But I have some hope, given how Amazon has directed their coverage, that Amazon is actually going to go towards like, hey, what if we just like gave you smart content? Like, what if we actually did like treat math as like an okay thing to talk about because it's the fundamental backbone of a box score, which everybody knows. I have some hopes on that. NBC, I think, has always kind of carried itself with a little bit more, how can I put this, dignity than some of the other outlets. Like, I don't mean that derisively. I just mean that like they want to have like a certain a certain level of gravitas that like Stephen A. Smith yelling at me or Chuck saying a fat joke about Shaq while Shaq makes a joke about no rings to Barkley for the 700th time isn't. Like, there's an opportunity for new voices, which I think is really good. From a game standpoint, I don't think we can change the conversation now because what I always get to is I'm like, guys, I don't understand how. I know that everybody has played this game that loves this. Like almost everybody that loves basketball has played the sport on some level. How do you not appreciate drawing two defenders and making a selfless pass to an open teammate for a catch and shoot quality shot? Like that's the fundamental of like that's good basketball. And for some reason with the Celtics, we're just like, this is garbage. And I really don't understand it. And the other effect is people only notice certain things. I always thought this is the opposite with the mid-range shots. When certain players would jack up 10 mid-range shots in a game, everyone remembers the ones that they made. Oh, what a tough shot. He made so many tough shots in that game. Yeah, he shot 4 of 10 from the field. Like he shot 40%. It's not good enough for you to win. You missed out on 6 possessions there. You didn't make enough out of those 10 possessions with how you shot. So I think instead what we need is what we do need though, we need a defensive adjustment. Is that we are going to need some coach to be like, no, I'm not willing to just go into this game and accept that I'm playing from behind versus Boston. We're going to guard the 3-point line first. I'm going to make them score at the rim over and over and over again. I'm going to make them beat us in points in the paint. And Celtics fans will be like, fine, we'll do that. And they might. But that's like the first step is teams changing how they guard. Because when I watch all these games, Pritchard, you mentioned earlier, is the one that drives me insane. Because I'm like, guys, Peyton is a better than people think defender and a better than people think passer and driver. There's one reason he's on the court. One. Go stay home. And the inability of teams to do that because of these principles is what has to change. The defenses need to catch up to the offense. Once that happens, we'll have better balance, which I think is what people are looking for.
So on the whole, because I'm assuming, I haven't asked, but I'm assuming NBC Sports Boston's not having any issue with the ratings with the way the Celtics have played in recent years. But on the whole, league ratings are down. People keep talking about it on a national level. What brings it back? What is it that brings the diehards are watching. You're watching, Evan's watching, I'm watching, but listeners of this show, I'm sure are watching. If you're bothering to listen to this show, you're watching basketball every night. You've got League Pass or whatever however you're consuming it across your various streaming or cable outlets. But what brings the average basketball fan, the casual fan, back to bring the ratings back? I mean, they're tweaking with the All-Star game format again and all that stuff, thinking that's going to make any sort of difference. It won't. But what does it on a night-to-night regular season level?
So I've been doing some research on this, and Evan Washburn Evan Wambach, pardon me, from NBA.com. He's senior director of basketball operations, and he's had some really interesting questions about comments about this. And one of the things that Evan said is that they've done like deep dive market research, and none of that indicates that three-pointers are the problem. Like none of that indicates that that's the issue. Maybe they're lying, but I tend to kind of think that the league takes it pretty seriously when they notice this drop off in ratings. They're like, hey, we should probably look at this. They're at least doing market research constantly. I also find this conversation really weird when it's like people aren't watching because of the amount of three-pointers. I'm like, but you're not watching to know that they're taking threes. Like if the drop off is from 2014, the problem is getting people in the door. And that a lot honestly has to do with how people have been trained to watch the NBA. People care about the NBA when there are dominant franchises in large markets. Now, the Boston Celtics are a dominant franchise in a large market. And if they win another title, maybe that starts to change. Maybe it becomes like, hey, I want to watch the Celtics dynasty. Maybe that like actually shifts. But that to me is like you have to either choose that you're going to lean in completely and try this, what I think is an unsustainable long-term approach to trying to just build up certain markets, or you have to retrain people to actually care about their teams. And the step one in that is you need to give them good games. And as part of that, you got to have better games, which means you got to release the schedule, because the players have made it clear that they're doing what they can. And the league has done everything they can with the 65 game limit. And all that resulted in was more injuries when the playoffs started. I don't have a way to understand how it is that we have so many more injury problems than we did 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Everyone's got opinions, from AAU, the amount of basketball played, to the level of athleticism, to the spacing requiring more burst movement. I think all of that probably has a say. I don't really care at the end of the day about this issue, because I'm like, look, we know that this isn't working. You need to reduce the schedule. Fewer games, more games in between for lead up, so that we can build up these matchups, so that we need to know when we get Celtics Cavaliers that there is a 60% chance or better that we're getting full rosters for those matchups, rather than like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's like probably what, like maybe a coin flip if Tatum's going to play, the coin flip if Mitchell's going to be available. You can't have that. If people are going to care about the regular season, you have to give them games they can actually trust and believe in. The league has not been able to do that, and things have shifted under their feet. That to me is step one in addressing the problem.
Yeah, one of the other things, to piggyback off that, I liked, Simmons had a great little intro monologue about this entire thing. And one of the things I really liked what he said, there's a lot of the history of the game, and it goes all the way back to when basketball was first. Like, if you have time to go back and listen to that, I think it's important, and it does a good job of framing things. But one of the things I think he mentioned in that rant, or in that monologue, or whatever you want to call it, was this past summer in the Olympics. And the idea that USA basketball is holding on to these ginormous stars, LeBron, Curry, KD, as long as possible. And they have done a ineffective job to market the next upcoming generation. And, I don't know where you want to put guys in that. Is Tatum in that? Is he too old for that? Is it more of like a 22, 23-year-old thing? Is it a 26, 27-year-old thing? How did Team USA trying to market these guys? Like it was more about Steph, LeBron, and KD than it was about Booker, Tatum and Anthony Edwards. And that to me was a misstep. And I sort of agreed with that, allowing those three guys, the three older guys, to dominate the team, give them one last ride, and let them get one more shot at a goal and ride off into the sunset. They favored that over allowing the new generation create their own storylines. Do you have any thoughts on the ability of the NBA to market the younger stars to a national audience?
Yeah, I think they're up against it because you need to be the best. Like you need to be the best players. That run wasn't necessarily surprising because the only thing was like KG didn't do the Olympics after his terrible experience with it, right? So in 2008, you didn't have Kobe and KG. That would have been their ride. It would have been Kobe and KG's like last Olympic ride in '08. Instead, it was Kobe, and then you had this next tier of elites of Dwayne Wade, who'd already won a championship, LeBron, Chris Bosh, Melo. Like you had that second class coming up behind one guy. This was you had three generational all-time top 15, top 20 players all in this group willing to play because I hated it because I was like, you guys left that FIBA team out to dry because none of you could deign to play for them. And now none of those guys get a shot and they look bad like you're riding in to save the day because you got all your buddies to play. Like it was gross to me. Congrats to Team USA. But but I think with the issue here is, look, Jokic and Giannis have owned this league over the last 4 years in the regular season. Like this has been their league. Embiid, I think you can argue, has been at least part of that conversation, but he's just not like nobody is, in my opinion, is as excited about Embiid as they are about Jokic and Giannis. And then behind that, you have Luka coming. And to me, the next 10 years are about Luka Doncic and Victor Wembanyama, unless another player comes out that is able to rise above those two. And with their skill sets and bodies, I don't know how. Like Cooper Flag, I think is going to be incredible. Do I think he's going to be Victor or Luka? No. Like this league is going to be dominated by international players at the top level over the next decade. And they tried to push Anthony Edwards this year. I thought it was so fascinating that they put Ant on opening night versus the Lakers. That was the decision, is to like, we're going to put Ant in the spotlight. And now we're kind of seeing like he's just not quite there yet. And he might not get there. He might just be like really, really good.
Well,
Doesn't mean he can't win a title.
Jordan in the playoffs last year.
Right. They compared him to Jordan, and like they're trying to make these guys, and you can't really do it. So the key is going to be like they're going to have to find somebody who is as good as Luka Doncic, Victor Wembanyama, and the aging of Giannis and Jokic, which honestly is really difficult. I think Tatum is in that conversation this year. He's been so good. He's started to dip a little bit over the last 3 weeks statistically, which is tough. But it is, I will say in Tatum's defense, I continue to be like, how do we keep having these conversations about a guy who has been to the conference finals this much? Like anybody who wins this often needs to be given more credit for what he's able to do. And for him, he needs to have like one spectacular offensive season. And that probably comes after this run is over because they don't need that from him. They need him to like play within a certain limit of individual excellence. This is one of the balances in the NBA right now. Luka, I think, is having his best season. He has his lowest usage of his career. Like, do less, impact more is how you win. You become a truly elite team. And that battles with the ability for guys to individually shape the game with their stats.
One more break. We got to tell you today's show is powered by GameTime. There is nothing better. Nothing better than going to a live game. So many core memories I have as a kid revolve around going to some sporting event, or obviously in adulthood, taking my kids to a sporting event. I mean, taking them to their first Patriots games, Red Sox, even, Woo Sox, Paw Sox. It doesn't have to be the pros, Celtics, Bruins, you name it. They love going to the Revs, wrestling. Can I include WWE? There's so many different things that you could do. Going to a game or a sporting event, it's easier now than ever before, thanks to our friends at GameTime, Evan.
Yeah, and GameTime has a new feature called GameTime Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier than ever. They filter out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats. You don't have to waste time sorting through a cajillion tickets. It stinks. We've all done it. Scroll in. None of that with GameTime. They give you the best deals right up front. They also filter when it comes to navigating tickets if you're trying to figure out what's in your area, because I like to be a little spontaneous in life. I don't know if you know this, Kaufman. And GameTime, with that in mind, just shows you like, hey, coming up, your neck of the woods, here's this, and this. So you're like, hey, I don't have any plans this weekend. Let's take a look at GameTime. Let's pull it up. You might find your next thing to do via GameTime. And they also have a feature that shows you just $50 tickets and under. And given the time of year, Kaufman, where we were at, looking for one final gift, easy. You don't have to go anywhere to get it. You can just sit on your phone, log on to Game Time. Tickets $50 and under might be a real fun thing to give to a loved one at this time of year.
Which I kind of am. So I might need to check out Game Time. All-in pricing is involved here. Toggling this feature shows you the total up front, no surprise fees at checkout. You get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. All those, where are we sitting? What's it look like? You can check. You can see what the view is from the seats right there on the app. Lowest ticket price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. It means you're making money on the deal. Game Time ticket coverage. Your purchase, it's covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create the account, redeem your code CLNS, $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Let's get back to the show. NBA Cup wrapped up in Vegas, and it was a great matchup, at least on paper, not necessarily in reality, but the Bucks handled the Thunder. I mean, it wasn't even the Thunder, just bad night. Shot incredibly poorly, especially from three. Shea was off, took him a while to get going, started to show up in the fourth quarter. It wasn't a good performance out of OKC. But of course, that game, being all the attention that was attached to it, you start to see social media narratives of, like, this is the team in the West that everybody's afraid of. Like, they're limping out here against Milwaukee, a team that we weren't even taking seriously till a couple weeks ago when they started to get it together. I do respect that the Bucks underdog, they didn't go out and, champagne bat the thing and go crazy in the locker room and all that. Like, we have a season to focus on here. They understand there is more at stake. We don't typically spent a lot of time, Ev, talking about like Nick Wright here on the show. But he will often say things to trigger NBA fans, Boston fans, all that. He made a comment, this has nothing to do with the Celtics, but about the importance of the NBA Cup the other day on his show. It's something that I think went viral anyway, of saying basically that with LeBron, his Jesus, going out and winning the first one, and then Giannis winning the second one, that this was and wanting to win it, like caring about winning it. This was a message to the rest of the league that basically, to be a great player, you need to have this on your resume. And while I vehemently disagree with that notion, I do think it's an interesting talking point, because, I got into it with a couple of buddies, and the response was basically, and I agree with this, it was like, I mean, are we going to look back at the end of Steph's career or Jokic's career if they haven't won an NBA Cup in-season title and say, like, they're not great players because this isn't on their resume? So I think the league would very much like to inflate the importance, obviously, of the NBA Cup and what it means to win that thing and hoist that banner, which is the dumbest thing in the world to begin with. But looking forward now, because it was LeBron, because it was Giannis, I've never really felt the Celtics, Tatum at the head of the snake, have really cared about winning this thing. I mean, it's just, we got our eyes on bigger banners, more important banners. But is this trending in a direction in your mind where some of the upper echelon players in the NBA are going to say, wait a minute, I don't need this on my resume. It's not going to determine whether or not I'm in the Hall of Fame or something. But I'd like it. I'd like to be in that special group that, that just now budding small group of great players to also win the in-season title. Does it matter at all? Or is it just people trying to give something meaning that really isn't there?
I think at its core, my biggest issue with the skepticism about the cup is just the idea that it has to reach a certain level. The NBA didn't present this as like, this is as important as the championship. They didn't do that. Like, it's just like a good thing to win. To flip this around, like, think about the way that you presented it, which is a very, like, this is how we talk about sports, right? Because we talk about the rings this way. Can he be great? He didn't win a ring, right? We wouldn't say that about the cup. Therefore, it can't be that important. But flip it around here. And let's do this instead. Instead of, he won the cup, so he's great. Flip it. He's great, so he won the cup. That's the way to think about this is great players. If we see next year another like elite player, if the Nuggets with Jokic or if the Mavericks with Luca, or like Steph, I thought was like if they hadn't run into the Rockets, I think the Warriors might have had a real shot at this thing. If Steph had won it, we would feel kind of the same way of like, oh, like this is like something that's on the resume of these all-time elite players. It's not that if you're missing it, you can't be considered it, but I do think that it helps with getting players to invest in it. I mean, to me, listening to the the players in the locker room talk about it, it was very honestly like once they were like, wait, okay, 500,000? Okay, so
Yeah.
explain the tiebreakers to me. And what the Bucks are trying to do is prove that it's not an either or. We have this tendency to be like, well, I don't want to win this because if I win this, it's like I won that and not the championship. And then it's like it becomes like a joke, right? With the Lakers, it's like, congrats on winning the NBA Cup. You got bounced in the first round. But if the Bucks were to go on and win the NBA title this season, it would be like, wow, Giannis won the Cup MVP, the Finals MVP, and Finals MVP is way more important than the number one, and that's like what we'll talk about. But like Cup MVP is on the list, and that's where it should be. Is just like it's on the list of accomplishments. There's a middle ground between like Brandon Anderson, who you've had on the show, a complete psycho, asked me like, where do you place this in terms of awards? And he was like, I think it's here and not here. It's like below, it's like above Rookie of the Year, but below this. And my answer was, it's like a second all-team NBA selection. It's not first team all NBA, but it's like a second team all NBA selection. That's the level that it rises to, which is really good. That's really good. But it's just like as long as we don't try and think that anyone's trying to raise us to this high level, it's just something fun that you can add to the context of a season, which I think is good.
Where I'll push back on that though, and follow me here on this. I feel like this is going to be something that we associate with teams and great players. Like if Derek White wins, like if he's named to the second team all NBA, right?
Right.
Like, you'll look at it as like cool, like that's an individual thing. That's a cool thing. That means something. There's distinction there. No one would ever say, you see that Derek White won the NBA Cup. Like, no, who cares? Like, nobody would look at it that way. Like, you need to like Tatum, Brown, sure, but then there's a drop off.
We're in like the second year though, man. And like, here's the thing: if you don't want it to succeed, it's not going to succeed for you. And like, if you're a Boston fan and your standard is 18 banners, then yeah, you're going to look down on it. And I get it. But also, if you had like, think back to the Tatum's first season, 17-18. If that team, imagine if Isaiah Thomas won Cup MVP and how cool that would feel for Isaiah to have gotten that award before you completely ruined his career. Like, before that happened, it would have been like a really great accomplishment for Isaiah. And that team would have been a really cool story for this young Celtics team on the rise to have accomplished that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And look, that's a true statement about Isaiah that we have to all live with. But one thing that I like though is like it gives teams like you look at Houston, a team that's kind of on the rise, gives them a little bit more of like a national plug. They're not going to be on national TV every night. Nobody can name a lot of casual fans can't name the starting five of the Houston Rockets. That's a fact. They can't name the guys in the rotation. So it gives people an opportunity to see some guys they don't normally see. And look, this is year 2 when we're talking about this. Like, I know people are bashing it, but I still the idea that we're talking about it so much. You got to remember what we were and where we are now, I think, are two different places where we're putting a little more emphasis on the games in the beginning of the calendar. Because most of the time, who cares? Like, wake me up when the trade deadline happens or wake me up after All-Star weekend. Like, this gives you a chance to watch and live in important games in November and October. Like, that's the whole point of this whole thing. And I think it's been successful to varying levels, but successful.
Yeah, here's the other thing. I will watch 1 billion Cup games before I watch any NBA game in March. That month is a disaster. They plug all of the best matchups into the month where half the teams have locked seeding and don't care. Lost to the Hawks twice, by the way. Then The other teams are so injured, they're just trying to survive. Half the team is tanking, trying to get the next draft pick. March basketball is wretched. And these games were all, for the most part, interesting, competitive, and good. That's what we need to aspire to. March basketball needs to be obliterated from the NBA, and we need more cup games.
It helps me that we have March Madness at that time, and that's where a lot of the focus goes.
Yeah,
So you're
everyone just
absolutely
tunes
right
out.
about that. You're absolutely right about that. And those back-to-back Hawk losses, one of them was emphasized by DeJounte Murray killing the Celtics one-on-one every single possession on the floor, and that was really. And then you have the Joe. Didn't Joe get like tear his ACL or do something crazy that weekend? He got choked out by his MMA teacher or something. Like that's the coolest thing that happened in March last year. It's so right. That's Happy so right on.
You want to know how you know the cup has arrived? Because people are using it as a referendum on the Thunder. Like, I'm serious.
There you go. Mm-hmm.
When you start building narratives off of something, all of a sudden it's got like a little bit more importance, because now like throughout the rest of the season, people are gonna say, look, I get it. Like, yeah, Shea's really good, but like I saw that cup game.
Yeah.
Like they're gonna use it.
What's funny about that particular game?
Like it's a game, like it was a game 7, because obviously it's, winner take all.
Go home.
Like
my biggest problem with that game,
they didn't even show up.
My biggest problem with that game is how it's being talked about. We're talking about the Thunder missing a ton of threes, and it's a stage too big for them, blah, blah, blah. We're not talking about how great their perimeter defense was in the second half, and if they just hit a couple of shots, they were right back in that game. The Bucks could not do anything to start their offense until Dame got back on the floor. That's how good the perimeter defense was for OKC in that game. I was absolutely, and I've watched a little bit of OKC this year. I've watched a ton, I'll be honest about it, but the one thing I left that game was like, if the Thunder just hit a couple more shots in that game, they would have come back and won that game. No question about it. And yeah, we're all going to sit here talk about how many shots they made. And people are like, oh, the Thunder stink. They're not ready for the big time stage. And I was like, shot variance.
When you're building narrative haters, you know that you've arrived. That's the NBA Cup.
There you go. maybe that's the motto. We'll build haters. That's the NBA Cup.
A slogan based around that. I like
Love
that.
It.
Silver can use it. Credit Celtics beat, and specifically Matt Moore. So Celtics, like I said, 2 games, both on the road, Chicago, Orlando, just before Christmas break. No, they play on Christmas, 5:00, right around your dinner time, folks, at home at the Garden. I'm sure, maybe you'll be there. Many of you out there listening, obviously it'll be sold out and then some. Philadelphia, and then 3 more at home to close out 2024. Indiana twice on the 27th and 29th. And then Tuesday the 31st, New Year's Eve afternoon game, 3:00 against Toronto, before we get into 2025. The last thing that I will ask you, Matt, because as of right now, and it may not change for a little while, the Cavaliers, record-wise, are at the top of the NBA. And we've been having this conversation, especially leading into the couple of matchups we've seen between these two teams. But, how real are the Cavs? What is their ceiling? Do we take them seriously? All of this stuff. And look, I'm a believer in the Cavs. I don't know that I necessarily believe Cleveland is going to win a championship, but I am a believer that like this 23-4 record is not fluky. I think they'll certainly, if they're healthy, make a deep playoff run. And, if they're in the East Finals, that's not going to surprise me in the least. But is this a team that, you're looking at what it's doing right now and saying like, yeah, I mean, this team could win 65 games and go on a deep playoff run and make life tough for Boston or whomever it may be, if you're a believer in the Bucks getting hot, or the Knicks, or again, Team X in the East?
Yeah, I'm a believer that it's like you judge teams on their resume. I think when you start getting into the idea of like, well, I just don't believe this team can do it. I just think I'm like, what's your evidence? How do you know? Because this team isn't last year's team. It's different. And we don't have any sort of idea yet. I don't think Mitchell has played nearly to the level he can. And I think that he'll have better months ahead of him. I think Darius Garland's been great. I think Evan Mobley's been fantastic. I love Jared Allen. They've got a lot of shooters. My favorite stat is that they are 16-1 with Dean Wade in the lineup. 16-1. And everyone laughs. He's really good. He's really good. And he had that massive game versus Boston. So, you know what he can do. If the Eastern Conference Final started tomorrow and it was Celtics and Cavaliers, I would still pick the Celtics, because the Cavaliers haven't shown me that they can limit those 3-pointers that we talked about to begin the show. But with a series, with time to prepare, Kenny Atkinson, with the weapons that they have, with their ability to attack the Celtics' weakness at the rim, Yeah, I think that the Cavaliers are live to upset Boston. I've maintained this. Like there's got to be a way to credit Boston for being an incredible team, having one of the best regular seasons in NBA history last year, winning the title, playing selfless, excellent basketball, and also be like, yeah, but like they're beatable. Like this team isn't unbeatable. And so I do think that various teams are going to have a shot to knock them off. Not like they shouldn't be favored. Boston has to be favored versus any opponent it faces. That's what comes with winning a title. But I do think that the Cavaliers have a shot. If they can put together the right game plan, I do think that they're live to knock off Boston.
No one has had I can't quote it or I'd get canceled, but no one has had a better commentary on Dean Wade than Kevin Garnett. And if you know, you know. Go and just search for it on Twitter. It's incredible. Matt Moore, again, part of the Locked On family, has a Substack. Of course, he's from Action Network on Twitter at HP Basketball. And Matt, always enjoy when you hop on, man. Have to do it again in 25. But happy holidays and keep enjoying these Boston Celtics.
Hey, great conversation. Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely. We will step aside and let everyone enjoy their holiday break. Be back with you, of course, before we get to the new year. One last sort of deep dive into 2024 will be on the way. But for Matt, for Evan, I am Adam. We'll talk to you again next time.